so happy you're all here. This is so beautiful to see you all in this space together. And new faces. I know I've worked with quite a few of you in the IFS realm, so it's really cool to drop in with some new faces that I haven't worked with yet. So just to let our planner parts know where we're going, we'll spend the first few minutes just kind of getting acquainted with the group, because this will be a container that we keep for this week and for those of you who show up next week as well, because it's a 2-part series. And next week we'll build on the information we learned this week, and we'll be more integration based. So for the first few minutes, we'll just go around, everyone can say their name and just literally one sentence about either what you want to learn, why you're here, what you're excited about, something you know about parts work, whatever you want to share, but just brief, 1 minute or one sentence thing about yourself. And then we'll head into kind of more the lecture based of getting to know a little bit about what internal family system is and the basics of parts work. And then we'll move into integration practices. So the first part will be taking that information that we're learning, and we'll do a little mapping, which I know some of you have done with me before. So you can build on that map, and for those of you that's new, we'll do a little mapping. And then we'll do the second half of the last hour will be 45 minutes of yin postures, getting to meet our parts that want to show up, and then we'll drop the last 15 minutes into a guided meditation and closing practice. So that's kind of where we're gonna head for everybody. So I'm Lauren, for those of you who are new faces. And I've been doing this practice for the last couple years, and really, do you wanna lead us? And we can go around this way, and just your name so we can get to know, and something about whatever you wanna share.
Yeah, my name is Lauren, and I'm really excited to just discover more parts of myself that I need to uncover.
My name's John, and I'm just here to learn about IFS. It's pretty interesting.
My name is Michaela. IFS has helped me a lot in my life, so I am here to just continue the knowledge of IFS.
My name is Osha. I'm a good friend of Lauren's, and she has introduced IFS into my life, and I've seen how it's transformed her life in so many ways, opening up so many opportunities, and deepening the relationship to the work that we're here to do. And I'm excited to peel my onion, get to the core of just a couple of things. So thank you.
I'm Hannah, and I've just been looking for an opportunity to connect a little bit more deeply with others and myself, so this feels like it.
I'm Noah, and I have no idea why I'm here. She signed me up for it. I would like to fly some tails.
We love that.
I'm Wendy, and I'm here to continue learning on IFS and support someone that I love with my entire heart.
I'm Ashley, and not really sure why I'm here, but I love to learn, and I'm a really curious soul, so I'm excited to dive in.
My name is Whitney, and I have worked with Lauren before with IFS, been an amazing beneficiary of her teaching, so just here to continue it.
My name is Sarah, and I am very open and vulnerable to this kind of practice right at the moment in my life. So, I feel as if I highly connect with what Lauren has to offer, and sometimes I can be closed off. So, I'm really excited to learn more about myself and experience your teaching.
I'm Tamara. I know nothing about IFS, but I met Lauren last weekend at a party, Oktoberfest party, and she said, "Come, it will change your life." And then I dragged my girlfriend along. So we're both here to see what it's all about.
Yay.
Hi, I'm Holly, and I'm just always looking for ways to work through my own stuff. And I'd also like to learn to be a little bit more open to my levels of emotions and go with the flow a little more.
Thank you everyone for being here. It's so special to bring you. This is my home studio that I've been at for 5 years, and this is the first workshop I've actually hosted here. So it's a really special moment, and I'm really grateful to have you all in this space with me. So we'll just drop a little into if you guys want to use the packet, there's an invitation there. You don't absolutely have to. But just if you wanted to take notes, anything to take with you for the future, or to explore a little deeper on your own, there's a plethora of information of internal family systems on the internet. So anything that you don't get filled in that you're more curious about, this is kind of a guidance to what you could look into deeper for yourself. So we'll start with what is internal family systems for those of you who don't know and are new to this practice. It's a psycho-spiritual model is what they call it. It's been around for about 40 years, and it's been used to kind of help people separate the parts of themselves that have different agendas and missions from the true self that lives kind of at the core of all of us, which is they found through all these years of practice that it's just below the surface of all of our parts. And so our parts are normally born from something that happened in our life that stepped in to kind of save the day, so to speak. So we have different parts that have hold different agendas and have different missions, but they were born out of a time and space where they needed to kind of save us. And so these parts are actually very real entities that live inside of the system and kind of guide us throughout our day, and we aren't always fully aware when and how they're stepping in until we go in and meet them and have more awareness of who and how they're showing up in the system. And so internal family systems is a really beautiful psychotherapeutic model because it is non-pathologizing, and that is actually pretty unique, and it's kind of just surfacing in the psychotherapeutic field, which was very we're mono-minded, and anything that is not of the mono-mind is fragmented and therefore is broken and must be fixed. And whereas IFS understands that we're a multiplicity of the mind by nature, we're actually multi-personality beings by nature, and that's a really good thing because these different personalities and characteristics that we have are actually really valuable to our system and to us as a human in a whole. And so there are no bad parts is kind of the number one philosophy of internal family system, that we're not broken, we don't need to be fixed, and neither do other people. There's no bad parts of people, there's just parts of people that are maybe unfavorable sometimes or challenging, but they also serve a purpose in our system as well as other people's systems, and therefore it allows us to lead with more of a lens of compassion in understanding that people do things for a very certain reason that we might or they might not also understand. But that there are no bad parts in the fact that everything is kind of was born out of a time that actually needed to save somebody. And that our parts are benevolent, their intentions are pure, even if the ways they show up are not always of service to the system or outdated, so to speak. And so most of us who aren't doing this inner work are walking around with kind of an overwhelmed nervous system and parts that are constantly hijacking their nervous system as a way to keep them safe. And so this is kind of a practice to re-regulate the nervous system and bring the system back into coherence and a set of wholeness by getting to know each part of us that plays each role, so that when they do show up, we have more awareness who's showing up, why they're showing up. I can actually take a breath and take some space and step back from how they're running the show. Be wait a second, is that actually authentically what I feel, or is that just what a part of me feels? And so a lot of us have this kind of, we call it opposing parts, where a part of me feels like it wants this thing, but another part of me feels this way. And most of us are kind of in this duality, in this conversation, in our inner dialogue, all the time, without awareness that these are actually two real parts who have two very real agendas that are on a mission, and that's why they're doing this, is because they both really, really believe that this is the way to do it, and the other one really, really believes this is the way to do it. And within the system, if we're not going in and communicating and understanding why they're doing and who's doing what, they're just doing this all day. And often they're two inner children. So it's really you have 2 5-year-olds doing this. So when you think about your outer relationships, and my parts are showing up and your parts are showing up from a triggered space, we really just have 2 inner children arguing with each other, and that doesn't really allow for a lot of space to really move through things if we're both speaking from like inner wounded children, right? So that's kind of like the basis of what this work is about. And there we'll go through kind of what the parts are. There's 2 categories of parts. There's 2 types of parts that live within the system and that kind of guide the system in the ways that it does. And the first part and the most kind of important part of doing the work with, well, that's not true. They're both very important. But the exiles are a really important part to understand because they're what we would call like the root wound. They're kind of they're the wounded inner child that actually experienced and lived through the trauma of what was happening in their life at that time. And they are the ones that hold that in the body and in the nervous system in the memory space. So the exile is kind of what you can think of as like the root wound of what is guiding the rest of the system. And so because they live in the nervous system and they respond in the nervous system in a way that's usually unfavorable because most of our parts were born out of traumatic experiences, we have other parts that step in to kind of save them. And so we call those protectors. So there's the 2 categories are the exiles and the second category is the protectors. There's 2 types of protectors and they kind of show up. We have like a tier of, our system works in a tier of protectors and how these parts of us tend to show up. And that's why I like that Brittany mentioned the onion because it really is in working in internal family systems. Most traditional therapeutic models will try to go right to the exile and the root wound and like heal the root wound without actually getting permission from the protectors first, which is often why it's really easy to revert back into old patterns through traditional therapeutic modeling. And whereas IFS begins to peel back the layer of the onion that is the complicated internal family system and begins to understand like, oh, this protector first we need to like clear out of the way and who's also protecting this part in order to get to the exile. And so it's like there's a lot, we're like super multi-personality and there's a lot of parts of us that play a lot of roles in our life and they're super important, most of them. And then there's some that are like, we could probably do without as much. But either way, they're there to protect the exile, which is the root wound. And so their job is really to just make sure that the system's at all times as far away from that nervous system response, the exile experience, as possible. Does that make sense so far? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I think so, because it's like pretty basic, it's also pretty complicated. And so I'll give some examples because, so our exile, so if the example I give quite often because I think it's the easiest and quickest way because most of us can relate to this part because most of us have a planner part. So our planner part is very important in our life. It helps us show up to work on time and hold containers on time, and it's just a very important part of our day-to-day life. And this is what we call a manager role. So of the 2 types of protectors that we have managers and we have firefighters. And so the managers are our preventative staff. They're our ones that show up on the our day-to-day life, like our planner part, for example, to mitigate anything in our control. They're controlling parts, really. They try to control our outer environment as much as they can to mitigate any possibility of a triggered exile. Because we really don't want to trigger those parts of us that live in those deep, deep-rooted wounds. But we all know what it feels like to be triggered by one of those, to be in that exile, that deep, really triggered wound. But actually, we're pretty unaware that most of our day-to-day is actually mitigated ahead of time by a lot of our parts from triggering those inner exiles as much as possible. And so when they actually can't do that job and that life happens the way life happens, and our managers can't necessarily mitigate everything in our outer environment, right? Like life happens. Then we have our second tier of protectors who come in also with the same job, that is to make sure the exile does not get triggered. They call them exiles because we literally exile them into the basement and lock them away because we really don't want to feel what they felt in the nervous system like ever again because it really shakes up the system. And so when the managers can't do their roles, then the firefighters step in. And we have many firefighters who have different tiers and different roles, but the rule in IFS, or the way they explain it, is that the firefighter will burn down the house to put out the fire. They're self-sabotaging parts usually, And they can show up in many different ways, but they do not care what happens to the inner environment or the outer environment. Their only job is to make sure the exile is not triggered. That's all they care about, and whatever specific exile they protect. And so the firefighters can look often like addiction. Anger is a great firefighter. Dissociation is a great firefighter. There are many different firefighters we use in our internal system to take ourselves out of what is being triggered. So with that example in mind, we'll go back to the planner part. So say most of us have some version of a planner part. She usually comes online around like 7, 8, 9 years old, somewhere around there, where we enter into the school system and we have to like be on time, and we start getting in trouble if we're late. We start getting in trouble if we don't like get into line the right way. Like we start getting penalized for being disorganized or late. And so most of us start to create a part around that time that's like our internal planner part, who's like, we're gonna make sure that we don't wanna get punished, we don't wanna be late, we don't wanna feel those feelings in the nervous system, therefore we're gonna create a part that manages and mitigates life. And planning ahead of time and organizing ourselves is one really, really great way to keep the system stable. So most of us have some version of this, and it can come on, everyone will have their own version of when this part came online and what it went through to be created. But the example I often use is like say you're around 8 years old and you're handing a paper in to your teacher in front of the whole class, but it's late, and she shames you in front of the whole class. And she's like, how dare you turn this paper in late? Just so you know, this is late, I can't give you a good grade. And your whole nervous system as a little 8-year-old responds to like that shame and that embarrassment and that like, oh my God, I'm in trouble response. So then you begin, this happens, exiles are not one-off creations. Like we don't generally have like one experience that creates an exile. That's very rare. It's usually like many experiences in our life have happened over and over again before we have to create a protector around that exile. So whatever many examples will lead to that moment, but at that pinnacle moment where we decide like, okay, we need a protector now for this, so we don't feel in the nervous system what this little child is feeling, you stand in the planner part. And she's a great one to be like, okay, we will never turn another paper in late on time. We will always make sure we are ready for class. We'll make sure our homework is done the night before. And she begins to kind of like create that version of herself, that part, who plays that role. And it's very important in the life that we live in, especially American culture. So you fast forward about 30 years and say you're working in some big job and you have a big presentation the next day. And your planner part has showed up and she's like, all right, we got this. Our PowerPoint is ready. We have it backed up on a hard drive. We put gas in the tank. We picked out our outfit the night before. We're leaving half hour early. We are ready. We're gonna make sure we don't blow this huge presentation. Fast forward whatever amount of time, she gets stuck in traffic. Life happens. So her planner part has done everything it can to mitigate the possibility of this wounded 8-year-old exile showing up and feeling in the nervous system of like, oh my God, I'm late, I'm in trouble, whatever the feeling is. And so then we start to send in the firefighters because our manager has done its job, but it actually hasn't sufficiently met the needs because life has done life. And so we send in the first tier of firefighters, which is usually, as most of us have been in traffic, understand anger is a great first firefighter when we're stuck in traffic. Is like, oh, we're late, like shit. Like the anger and the frustration at everyone around you being the fault, the fact that the accident was a fault, and like how could they? Basically, our outer environment is now no longer controlled. So we start to send in the controlling mechanisms of the firefighter. And so after we've realized that anger is not actually gonna work anymore, then we'll send in the second tier of firefighter, which can be dissociation or addiction. We can scroll the social media while we wait, turn on the music, smoke the cigarette, whatever we need to kind of like step outside of the discomfort of the fact that this exile is feeling triggered, that it's starting to be like, ooh, if we don't get there on time, we're in so much trouble. And so that's kind of like a general idea of like how things work within the system on a day-to-day life, and that we have all of these preventative measures, and we have these protectors who are working super, super hard to make sure the system stays regulated as possible. So when we have a lot of exiles and a lot of protectors and we are not doing any inner work or integration practices, we are walking around kind of these like protectors on high, and they are working like 24/7, and they're exhausted and overworked, and they are just, your whole nervous system is on high 24/7. And so most of us can probably recognize people in our family or in our friends or in our social circles that are the type of people who just like cannot breathe. They are just on high 24/7. Their protectors are always on. And they don't know how to just like relax, right? Like my mom is a great example in my personal life. She lives in fight or flight 24/7 and just has a lot of protectors that make it really hard for her to like and just relax and breathe for a second. And so that's kind of this work is kind of using internal family systems as the foundation, getting to know your own personal parts, who they are, where they came from, how they were born, how they shape your life, and then using integration practices to either go in and meet them, work with them, or create space for them. That's a lot of what we're really doing is creating space. And so whether it's meditation, yoga, going on runs, skiing, whatever you find to go to self energy, to go outside of your parts, is really just an opportunity we try to find in the system to create space so we can breathe. And so that brings us to the self energy, which is on page 6. It's the second part and most important part of what we'll be doing is once we get to know our parts a little bit, then we go to the part called the self. And we call it in internal family systems the self with a capital S. But most of you probably know it as spirit or soul or the part of yourself that's not a part is what they say. And it's the part and they found through thousands of studies all around the world, 40 years of data, that doesn't matter what demographic you're working with. They've worked with pedophiles and murderers and all sorts of people. And underneath the surface of every single person, just below the surface of their parts, is the self. And we all have access to it. And they found that the self, once we can go there, it has an innate capacity to heal all of our parts. So as a facilitator of internal family systems, especially when I'm working one-on-one with clients, it's not about helping them heal their parts. It's bringing them to self, because once they go there, they know how to heal themselves. And so that's why I love this practice, is working with a facilitator is really powerful, but actually all of us have access to self, and we can all do this work on our own, in our own space, when the time is right for us, if we learn the basic tools of how to go there. Because the self knows how to heal our parts, and it is capacitated to heal our parts. It has like endless capacity. Its cup is always full. And it knows how to always kind of go there and bring us back to wholeness and peace and calm. And so I think on page 7, I think, there's a list of what we call the 8 C's of internal family systems. And they're really the 8 C's of self-energy. And so when you're with people or with yourself and you begin to notice one of these 8 C words come up, it's when we kind of can see that people are in self-energy, because these are the 8 C words that really there's many other words that fall in there too, but they like alliteration for whatever reason in internal family systems. So we use these 8 C words. And they all kind of embody different things that we can all recognize, right? We understand what it feels like to feel compassion in our system or calm in our system. And a lot of us are searching for things like compassion, clarity, confidence. And these are innately in all of us, and it's just below the parts. And so it's really clearing out the parts, getting the parts to have some space so that we can go to self and reside there as often as we are capacitated to, as often as we can. And so we want to really create connection from self to part is really what we're doing, because the self, again, is the healing entity we all have inside. And while we have all these parts that are important, a lot of them are a little aggressive or not of service, right? Like our planner part, love her, she's great. But when I'm in a meditation, I'm like, babe, I don't need to know what's for lunch tomorrow. Like, we're good. But she's constantly on well, what are we planning for this? How's this gonna go? Are we ready for this? And it's like, you're important when you're important, and I also need you to take a step back when it's time to take a step back. And so as we get to meet our parts and work with them, it's really creating relationship from self to part, so that way we can have that inner dialogue with them of, okay, like I hear you, I'm grateful for your concern, and it's actually okay to breathe right now. And a lot of the time our parts are not aware it's okay to breathe. So we're going in and teaching them it's okay to breathe. Because most of them are on high all the time, and they think if they don't do their job, the whole system is gonna fail. And most of them are unaware that there's like other parts. Most of them are unaware that there is a self. And so they easily can come in and hijack. We call it like hijacking. And so you'll probably notice some people when they get hijacked, you probably know people in your life who like get really angry on a whim, or really sad out of nowhere, or things where their parts can just come easily hijack them very quickly in a way where the whole system gets taken over. And so what we're trying to do is like identify the parts of us that hijack us and create space. So that way when they do try to hijack, we're like, okay, if we take a step back, I see who's trying to hijack me right now. How can I bring more awareness into my field and spaciousness into my field so that way we can mindfully ask them to step back or ask them to do it in a different way or get clear. Like clarity is one of the 8 C words, so we can get clear on what's a part and what are our parts and what is true. Because our intuition is often speaking, but our parts have agendas. So it's like really hard sometimes to hear what the intuition is offering when we have all these parts. We're like, no, we shouldn't do that. We're scared of that. No, that's not a good idea. And it's like, well, is that true? Or is that just a part of us who holds that deep ingrained belief, who lives in a fear of an exile and a nervous system response? So it's really like learning to get clear. So we'll go now to page 8, I think it's on in yours. Yeah, and we're gonna map our parts. So that'll be like our first introduction into some of our parts. And does anyone not have a pen? You? Okay, I'm gonna go grab you a pen. You have an extra one?
Yeah, whatever you need.
And so in the center of this circle, I want you all to write the word self. And this is the part of us that's not a part, the self. And we'll begin to, we're calling it a constellation. You're gonna make your own inner solar system to the best of your ability. And you'll be able to come back to this as you continue parts work, as you begin to add new parts, begin to understand your parts, and how they relate to the self. So the self is at the center of all of us, and we have many parts who do have access to self inherently, and many who definitely do not. And so what we want to draw is like the closest to self we can, the ones that have a lot of access to self. So for me, like my therapist part has a lot of access to self because we need to oscillate between self energy and holding authentic space for people while we're in a session, and also bring in information, knowledge, and training simultaneously. So it's like we live very close to self energy because we need to, and we know very mindfully how to oscillate between, okay, when is it time to speak from like the therapist mind space of a part, and when is it time to just listen and authentically hold space for this person from self energy so that they feel safe, seen, and heard. So many of us have different parts that kind of oscillate quickly between self and not. And then many of our exiles, if we've never done work with them, kind of like float out in the ether of our solar system. Many of them are not tethered to self at all. And so a lot of this work is beginning to create relationship from self to the parts of us that are kind of like not really tethered to self at all, or that don't even know self exists. So on this map, you can start to map out your parts. And so you can just take a second to think of some parts of you that show up often, and like they can be as vague as daughter, sister, best friend, like, and you'll begin to know deeper who they actually are as they show themselves further to you. But just the different parts you play in your life, like who are the different roles you play? How do they show up? Do you have a planner part? Do you have a controlling part? Do you have an inner critic? Do you have an OCD part? Do you have these different parts that help dissociate you and take you away? Do you have an angry part? Because that's a very common fighter most of us can resonate with. Do you have a dissociated part that just wants to like shut down and go out into outer space when life gets hard? Most of us have some version of a lot of the patterned parts. And so you can just kind of go in and just start writing out the roles that you already know that you play. And this will help guide us through our yin postures of who's ready to show up and do this work with us. But we can't really do that until we start to be like, oh, actually, I see you. So yeah, just kind of going in and just taking, we'll do like 5 to 10 minutes of going through and mapping out parts that we might already know or might have an inkling about, or a role we might know we play, or a way that we categorize ourselves or identify ourselves.
So closer to the self circle are like our parts that are when we feel like really in flow or like really connected, and then like as we get further away is like the parts that
Yeah.
feel less aligned.
Yeah, so a lot of people in this room, or people in Aspen in general, could probably relate with like an adrenaline part, right? Like a lot of people in Aspen love or adrenaline seeking, and that is actually a really close part to self because it oscillates between flow state and seeking that like adrenaline rush, that addictive part, right? And it's like, it is actually, it can be a firefighter for some people, or it can just be a part that is really close to their self energy because it brings them to self really quickly. Like if you're one of those skiers that uses skiing to go into flow state, you know that part of you really well. And you know it can also push boundaries that are not necessarily good for the system and bring you to places that it's adrenaline seeking, it is addicting. And so it sometimes can be dangerous and not necessarily of service to the system, but it knows really quickly how to get to self-energy. Musicians, great example, same idea, where like they know how to quickly go into self-energy, and it's still a part that they play. It's still a role. I'm a bassist in a band. That's my role. That's how I identify myself. And it also helps bring me to self. So that's something that can kind of organize itself around the self-energy closer. Dick Schwartz, who's the founder of Internal Family Systems, says he's been doing this for 40 years, and he says he's still finding new parts of himself all the time. So there are like arguably like hundreds that live in and around the system. They're formed all the time as life continues to happen. New versions of old parts are formed as we age. And so as you go in and do this work, you will begin to see overlaps of like, oh, that part might actually be the same as this part, or they might be totally different parts. And just beginning to go in and map them is really helpful because they'll start introducing themselves to you, and you'll start getting to know who they are in the system and what role they play. So we'll just take like 2 more minutes here. Does anyone have any questions?
Could you give more examples of parts, like ideas or parts?
So I think during the mapping part, it's a lot of kind of like more vague generalizations until you get to know your parts. So it's a lot of like, okay, I'm a daughter, But as I've gone in and met daughter part that has a relationship with mom is very different from my daughter part that has a relationship with my dad. They're two separate parts, even though they're the same role, and they trigger the system very differently based on those relationships. And they've affected me very differently. Like the daughter part that is my dad's part is a very different part than the daughter part that is my mom's part. And when I'm around my mom, I'm a whole different person. She hijacks me a lot when I'm around my mom in a way that's not favorable in the system. And yeah, so it's like I call her my 16-year-old narcolepsy part because she's done a lot. So it's like I really know her really well, but she started on my map as daughter part. And as I've gone and got to know her, I'm like, who are you really? Like, what part do you really live in the system? Because there's many versions of me as a little girl living under my mom, right? But there's one that's like very potent in the system that I work with a lot, who happens to be around the age of 16. So that's the other thing about our parts. They have different ages and personalities, and when you go in and meet them, it's pretty wild because they are very real entities that live inside of our system. They will tell you how old they are, and most often when you ask them how old they think you are, they're very often single digits or teenagers. They're very young, and they're very unaware that you're like in your 30s or 40s or 50s. Like they don't actually believe you when you go tell them that. They're like, no, we're still 6. And you're like, no, like we're resourced now, and we have these things, and we have community, and we're loved, and all these things. And they're like, that's just not true. And so you have to go in and unburden them and teach them. We call it updating our protectors, because a lot of time these protectors are actually pretty unaware that we're older. They live in the system as young entities. And so when we go in and we work with them, especially through a facilitator, we can actually update them through a process of bringing them into real time, because most of them are stuck in the time of the trauma they experienced. And so again, that's why when we're like in relationship with people, whether it's our boss or our friends or our partner, like we very often have like 2 5-year-olds yelling at each other, very unaware, because these parts that are speaking are usually very young, that experience trauma at a really young age. And our parts kind of can age. So like the 16-year-old part I was just referring to, she has a 12-year-old version of herself as well. And if I want to really go into her deep, deep rooted wound, she's probably realistically like a baby, because like she's a lot of my self-worth wound. So when I really go deep into her, like she's got a lot of actually like very young, probably nonverbal parts. And there are nonverbal parts of us that communicate through the body somatically. They're not necessarily able to communicate, because this is the crazy thing about parts work. If you haven't done it yet, when you go in and you talk to your parts through parts work, they talk back just the way I'm talking to you. And so it's wild. You can go in and literally talk to them in real conversation. But for the parts of us that are really young, sometimes they're nonverbal, and so they'll communicate through the system somatically. So it's really that's why embodiment is a really, really important integration practice as you're getting to know yourself more and doing any type of inner work, because sometimes we need to release things in a somatic sense, because those parts cannot actually communicate to us in a verbal sense what their needs are, the way that they weren't able to at the time they were created in the first place. So our parts also age too, but some of them hold residence in the system in stronger ways than other parts. So like that version of me, she's got a lot of different versions of parts that have been created out of that like one initial exile. And they're mostly protectors. And so we've been kind of like slowly unpeeling the onion of all the different protectors that live in the system. But so yeah, I think for mapping, to start really vague, if you haven't met your parts yet and you're not like quite clear on who they are, is a good way to start creating introduction to them and letting the system know, like, I see you, so that they start being like, cool. So like, I'll give an example. Like when I was working with my therapist, she asked me, when's the last time you really sang and danced? Which is actually a Native American. There's actually like 4 questions that come in that, and it's actually a very like traditional sense of getting to know yourself through like many lineages. And so she just asked me these questions because we like didn't really know where to go, and I was like, I don't really have a part that's feeling called to work in this session. She's like, great, when's the last time you really sang and danced? And like immediately this 8-year-old girl showed up, and she's like, oh, well, I got a lot to say about that. We were 8, and we stopped singing and dancing and doing theater, and we started playing sports, and it's interesting because like in my system, that was a choice of mine. I made my parents let me make that choice. However, for her, that was like very sad moment, where we stopped honoring our voice and we started playing sports and stepping more into our masculine role. And so when I do integration work with her, but she lives in my throat and she's very loud in my system as well. But she showed up immediately as like, I'm 8, I went through this was my experience, as soon as like the inquiry was there in a safe space. So that's really what we're doing here, is creating safe space so that we can have inquiry to go in and see who is willing to maybe show up if we're ready to hear from them. But we have to also be capacitated to hear from them is a big part of it too. Because if we're not ready to hold what they're ready to show us, they know that. They know if we're not ready to hold what we want to hear. So that's a big part of it too, is continuing to do your own inner work so that way you have more spaciousness so you can continue to show up for the different parts of you and authentically hold space for them. Because I think that's the hardest part of this work, is like we all know the parts inside of us that we're like, ooh, I don't really want to go there. Or like, oh, I'm not today, you know? And so it's learning to be able to go there and hold space without it overwhelming the system and like taking over the system. Does anyone have any parts that they know that they would like to share that they've met? I know some of you have done this work with me before. Anyone who this is new for, that you might have an inkling of some parts that you want to get to know more?
Maybe. I just want to see if I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
Comparison.
Yeah, great part.
So is that a part?
Absolutely. Comparison's a great protector, because if we have, usually the root wound is something of like self-worth related.
Okay.
And so comparison will show up as like, yeah, the part of us that wants to see in other people what we want for that self-worth part, but it often triggers that part in a way that's not helpful, right? Comparison can also be simultaneous with the inner critic. The inner critic is one a lot of us have, and it is really, really good at comparing ourselves to other people and why we're not good enough. So, you know, but you can go in and meet it and be like, are you a comparison part? Are you the inner critic? Or are you guys two different parts in the system? Anyone else have anyone else they want to share or they think? Wendy?
I have a possessive part that I think I've known about her for a while, but I haven't like given it much like space or mindfulness, but it popped up like just this morning. And I was kind of like, ooh, I like don't really appreciate this right now. Like, why are you here? So yeah, kind of want to like work with that more and figure out like why.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good one.
what's the root? Like, what's going on? Because
Yeah.
it's thinking back, like it's been in my life for a really long time. So.
Yeah, and right, if we think of the root of possessiveness as control, and most of our managers' jobs are to control our outer environment. So like we have a lot of controlling parts by nature, because when we live in a world that is unknown, especially as a child, that's scary. It's a scary world to have unpredictability and unknown. So we create managers to control our outer environment to mitigate that unknown and unpredictability of life as much as possible. But life still does life, right? Which is why our firefighters come in.
Going off of what you said, I wrote like daughter to my phone. The daughter of my dad, not my mom. Well, I wrote both, but one that I want to like be able to heal is being like my dad's daughter and my relationship to him.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Anyone else?
We're trying to understand it better.
Right. Got to start there for sure. Anyone else have anyone they want to share or they're curious about?
I guess the part of me that shows up in community or social situations, there's something that causes social anxiety that keeps me from like more deeply connecting with others, like a deep like mistrust or like, and it's probably linked to like the inner critic and to like comparison to like all the things. But I don't know, is that a part or is that just like a facet of life, like being in community? Or is there like a part of me that can show up in community that's in flow or whatever? Like what would
I would probably say it's less community part and more social anxiety part. Because the community part of you is probably very linked to self energy. It's the one that really knows how, because connectedness is one of the 8 C words, and we really understand the value of being connected to other people. That is super important as a human species. We need connectedness. but like soul connectedness, like authentic connectedness, and that's what an authentic community offers us. And so we seek that all the time, but we often have a protector. Social anxiety is a great protector of being like, oh, well, what if they don't like me? Oh, what if I'm not good enough? What if I say something stupid? Like, we have a lot of protectors that'll step in to make sure that the community we're seeking, we don't get rejected by. Because often at some point in our early life, we felt rejected by the community we were trying to infiltrate into. So you can go in and ask that part who it is and where it is, but if you start with the part that it affiliates as the stressor, so the social anxiety, that's a really good way, like a really good trailhead to kind of go in and be like, why do you feel social anxiety? Like what is triggering the nervous system in your response, which is the social anxiety? And that's a really good way to kind of go into our parts, is like, as we get to know how they show up in the system, that's a quicker way to kind of get to like who they are and where they are and what their intentions are. Anyone else have any other?
The busy part, to stay busy and not really slow down. So I would like to go a little deeper into that part that wants to keep me on the move so much.
Productivity parts are really good managers that most of us have some version of. And so there's usually like two ways that productivity parts show up, and it's either to keep us hyperproductive and it keeps us energized to stay the wheel turning, or it shows up, overwhelms us, and shuts us down. We get the anxiety and tiredness over having so much to do, and we dissociate. So like most of us have some version of a productivity part based especially like culturally in this culture as it's valued. We really value a productivity part in this culture. So all of us have some version of it that again comes online around that same age where we're told like, get good grades, and like we start valuing productivity and how well we show up in our outer environment. We start getting rewarded for things around our productivity. And so a lot of us will have a productivity part that continues seeking that validation from whatever the wound is. So usually like for example, a lot of us have like a good grades part that can probably resonate with like through grade school of like it really needed those good grades to take home to seek that validation from our caregivers of like, good job, you did so good in school, or our teachers at school, our mentors, whoever we looked up to, whoever we needed that validation from. Our peers, whatever. And so we create a productivity part. Well, if I just get good grades all the time and I do the extracurriculars and I go to a really good college, like and then I go on to do this other thing, and then I go on to work for this corporation, like, and I'm constantly seeking that validation from other people. That's one version of productivity. It could also be to keep us busy and distracted and dissociated. Like they all have their own reason for doing what they do in the system. And everyone who has this part or some version of this part can go in and ask, and it will have its own unique answer. So you can go in and ask that one why it's keeping you moving so much. But it's also a really important part. So that's why it's really important to have gratitude for our parts while also being like, thank you for saving me and bringing me the validation I needed or whatever at the time. And like, can we slow down? Can we have a day off? Can we whatever, fill in the blank. Anyone else? Okay, cool. So we'll kind of segue in with these parts in mind. I want you guys to keep these parts in mind, or any that are on the forefront of your mind that have shown up, because this is the cool thing about parts is they're constantly talking to us, and we're really good at not listening. So in this circle and in this space, if you've had a part kind of show up and give you like a little taste of itself, it's probably screaming at you very loudly. And you're probably doing a really good job of having other parts be like, no, we're good. We'll talk about that later. We'll go to this other part. So like just keep that in mind, is that if there's a part speaking very loudly to you, they might be the one that needs a little attention in this space where they're held safely. Because that's kind of what all of our parts need. And so yeah, just that's kind of part of parts work, is beginning to listen to all of the parts of us that are constantly speaking and getting to know them. So the ones that are speaking the loudest today, we're going to invite those into the integration practices so that if they do feel safe to open up and bring some awareness to their story, we're holding space for them in this container. And ideally next week, if you come next week as well. Because a big part of creating trust for our parts, so for those of you who are not coming next week, or don't do this work with me regularly, a big, big part of parts work is creating trust. The same way that we do in any relationship, so from friend to friend, we spend a lot of time like getting to know each other, creating trust, hanging out, and then we start to get vulnerable, and then we start to get to know each other, we start to see each other's parts, even the unfavorable ones, and then we really decide like, okay, this is the relationship now. And so our parts are the same way. So it's self to parts, again, like self being the internal caregiver, and the internal caregiver we all have access to, creating trust from that to our parts. And that's honestly like a lot of the work. Like you can spend months with clients just doing like self to part with one part who's like, fuck no, like I don't want to do any of this work. And like really like starting to create a relationship and like, okay, well tell me why I don't want to do any of this work. Let's meet the protector that's in front of that. And like it takes a lot of time to create trust with certain parts who have no trust in the system. And so honoring that is really important. Once we do create relationship, we want to keep kind of revisiting them as often as we can to let them know we really see them. Because if we go in and we meet a part in a session like this and we drop in and we're like, holy shit, that just unleashed like this whole part of me that I didn't even know I had, and then we never talk to that part again, you best believe they will be screaming at you from here on out. And most of our parts communicate through the body. So the body keeps the score. If you're not familiar with the book, I highly recommend, but the body literally keeps the score, and our parts actually take up residence in different parts of our bodies. So if you meet people who are like, oh yeah, I've got chronic low back pain, or I always tear my right knee, I'm like, there's someone living there literally screaming at you lifelong. So it's like they take up residence in the physical body, and if you start to create trust and then ignore them, they will very loudly communicate through wherever they live. And if they live in like the heart space or like the throat space or a space where they like can really constrict if they're feeling unheard, it can really cause a lot of upheaval in the system and a lot of problem in the nervous system. So we really want to keep creating relationships to them, whether that's like every day or every few days, just like when you wake up in the morning, be like, hey, heart that lives in the heart space, I see you. How you doing today? And just like letting them know that you're here for their journey and you're here for their healing, however long it takes, that you do see them, even if other parts might step in and hijack us to be more productive and we don't have time, whatever it is. Just taking the few moments as often as you can to let these parts know that you see them is really important for the trust creation so that you can keep working with them. Because the same way as if we like create trust with a person and then that person does something, just leaves us and abandons us, we're like, see, I told you, they weren't here for me. That's often what the system will do because our protectors really believe they are the ones in charge of healing the system. And so when we go begin to unblend them, is what we call it in IFS, often our parts are very blended and they're not aware that there's like a self energy. They all think that they're in charge. And so as we begin to unblend them and be like, oh, this is like the OCD part of me, and this is the possessive part in me, and this is the productivity part of me, we begin to unblend them and get to know them. When they do hijack the system, we really want to be able to like create trust in the system so that when they show up, they can hear us. Because if we want to show up from self-energy and we're like, hey, thank you so much, productivity part, I really see all the things you do for me, I need you to take a step back. But if you don't have a relationship from self to productivity part, that productivity part's gonna be like, no, we got shit to do. So it's like really creating a relationship. And if we go and create a relationship and then we abandon, a lot of these parts have like stepped in to be our internal caregivers. And so when we go in and we're like, oh, we actually have a caregiver, which is self-energy, and then we like just abandon them, the protectors that were our internal caregivers show up very quickly to be like, told you so. There's no one else protecting you but me. I got you. Been here for 30 years. And that's a lot of it, is like going in and being like, working with a part, and very often our protectors will be like, what do you mean there's an internal self? What do you mean? No, I'm in charge here. And so it's like going in and being like, okay, I see why you think that you've had to be in charge all these years. Actually, you don't need to play this role anymore. And our productivity parts, or our protector parts are like really excited when they start to meet self and can actually step back. They really are like, I can breathe, like, because they know the self. They do know the self when you go there, and they can hear the self very loudly. But it's taking them there and creating trust there so that they can feel that energy. And that's such a process of creating trust. So that is something we also want to do, is if you are leaving this container and you do meet parts in this container, continuing to work with them or journal with them or anything after you leave this space in the coming weeks, especially the next few weeks, that's like a really important invitation that I offer you. Definitely keep working with them if someone does show up in this space in a very vulnerable way. So cool. Anyone have any questions before we drop into integration work? Thoughts, questions, concerns? Anything they want to add that they know about this? Cool. So I'm going to drop us into meditation first before we do yin. And that'll bring us to self-energy. So the yin is really designed, so again, as our parts live somatically, they live in the energy body as well. And the yin is really, because yin as a practice is really structured around the meridian lines and the energy body. And if you're familiar with the meridian lines, they're the systems of energy that run throughout the body. And they connect to different organs, and they hold different intentions and energies. And the yin is really meant to expose the meridian line. So we're really going in and working with the energy body in the yin postures, because our parts take up residence in the energy body, connected directly to the physical body, right? Like they can't really disconnect the energy and the physical body. They're both deeply intertwined. And so wherever they live in the physical body is often a representation, intentionally they live there as a representation of who they're connected to in the energy body, right? So the kidney meridian will run through here and all the way down through the toe, and that's our fear body. So the kidneys, this is through traditional Chinese medicine lens, and the kidneys are the powerhouse, like circuit of the human system. So in Chinese medicine, they really believe if you have kidneys that are healthy, your whole system is healthy. And if your kidneys are not healthy, your whole system is out of whack. Even if everything else is healthy, they believe that that is the balancing system, is through the kidneys, mostly because they're connected to the adrenals, but they are the detoxers of the body energetically and physically. And so if you have like a big toe thing, that could be directly connected to your kidney line, or anything on the inside where the kidney meridian runs. So if we're doing something like toes pose, right, which we will do today, which drops you in here, this actually works most of the meridians. Like it runs the spleen and the stomach, which run through the thighs. It runs up through the back through the kidneys. This is a great pose actually for pretty much all the meridians. But so the yin is specifically designed to work with the energy body and the parts of us that live in the energy body and the physical body as well, because they're connected and they're intertwined and they're communicating simultaneously. And so the meditation we'll drop into, we'll go there first because that'll bring us to self-energy. So that way when we go into the yin postures, we're guided from self. And as the energy body begins to open, we're already accessed to self if any parts that live in those energy bodies want to show up. Does that make sense? Cool. And so we'll just wait for these to get back. And so this meditation that I want to drop us into, I've done with several of you before in the past. It's kind of my personal go-to meditation that I've found is like the quickest way for me to drop into self-energy. And I now, because I've practiced this meditation so many times in my life, that when I'm just like in my day-to-day life, that is how I go to self. If I'm like, okay, I need to go to self, I will like quickly run myself through this like 30-second process of getting myself to self-energy. And so we'll go through the actual meditation, which will take maybe like 10 or so minutes, and we'll create our reservoir space. And from there, once you kind of have that foundation and you keep practicing it, right, like anything, if we practice it and we get good at it, we can go there faster. If you keep practicing it, you'll eventually just be able to go there and go to self-energy when you need, and you don't want your parts to show up. And again, this is so helpful in relationships. And when we feel our parts show up being triggered by someone else, and we see their parts, we're able to like quickly be like, okay, go to self. Okay, we're breath, we're here now. Okay, that was just a part of me. I don't actually feel that way. That part feels that way, and it's true. That doesn't make it true for the situation. I'm here now. I see your parts. I have compassion for them now. I'm so sorry you feel that way. And it's a whole different way of like approaching how we interact with the people around us and to ourselves. Because if we're in self-energy when we're feeling triggered, we're good. Like, we have inherent wholeness there. We have capacity. We are resourced. We know how to have space and take breath when we're in self-energy, and if we're not leading from parts. And then it allows us to work much easier with the people around us as we see them fully leading from parts and being like, yeah, okay, I hear you. You're speaking from a part, and actually now I'm holding space for your part from compassion and from authenticity. My cup is now full. I'm not leading from an empty cup of a part that's overworked and exhausted, mostly our protectors. I'm actually leading from self-energy, and now my cup is full. I'm able to hold space for you, hold space for me, this conversation. We can communicate mindfully. Like, it really just opens up so much in our outer environment to be able to really meet the people around us where they're at authentically, and with no parts showing up with like judgment or shame or criticism. And that's like really important in a lot of our relationships, right? And to ourselves. When we notice that these parts are showing up, we can go here to get clear on like, okay, I hear why you feel that that's true. I hear why you feel that that's true. Is that really what we want to do? And really just going there to get clear. So we'll drop into the meditation. If you have a meditation cushion, I highly recommend you sitting on it. Let me go grab myself a block. Sorry if we're moving through this really fast. I'm trying to be mindful of the time container that we started a little late in. So, does anyone have any questions before we move into the integration side of things and less of the heady lecture side of things? So one of the things that we didn't quite get to that I did want to get to today, I'll just briefly speak on for a second, because a lot of our parts live in the head space. And they like to know things, right? Like, they want to know things. They like logistics. They like rationality. They like having control and predictability. And that is very much like a heady headspace thing. And so a lot of our parts kind of can dwell up in the head space. And while that wisdom is really, really important, we call it the three wisdom regions. It's the head, the heart, and the hara. So the head is a really important wisdom region, right? Like, we need to go there a lot in our day-to-day life. And we also need to learn how to not go there sometimes and silence those parts and like not be in the monkey mind so much. And then the second part is the heart space, also where a lot of parts live. The heart holds a lot of attachment. So we have a lot of parts that have attachment in the heart space. And even though it's beautiful to lead from the heart space, it's not always our most authentic place to lead from if there's a part there who holds a certain agenda. And so a lot of us will have a part that lives there who is like a really beautiful, deeply connected and tethered to self part, and they might still also have a mission or an attachment or anything like that. So that's why we really want to descend down into what we call the hara space, which is Japanese for low belly. And we want to go to the hara space to meet the self. So the self with a capital S is what we call it in internal family systems, but most ancient wisdoms forever have had a term for going to the low belly space and meeting the spirit there. And in Japanese, they call it the hara. So that's the head, the heart, and the hara. And so we'll go through the three wisdom regions in this meditation to take ourselves out of the parts of the head, out of the parts of the heart, and go directly to self. So that way, when we, again, are in our life interactions and we want to use this practice, we can know consciously, okay, let's go from the head to the heart and bring it down to the hara. And we can go there when we need to. And the more we practice this meditation or this style of meditation, the quicker we learn to descend without having to have like 10 minutes, okay, I need to sit down, I need to clear my space, I need to be in a container. We can actually just like in real time be like, deep breath, okay, we're here now. And it's been something that's been so helpful in my life to being able to meet the people I love so much where they're at. And of course, there's a lot more work to be done there. I have a lot of parts who have a lot of missions. But for the most part, we are able to figure out how to go there pretty quickly, even if it takes a few minutes. So that's the invitation of this meditation. We'll do it today, and then those of you who are here next week will also start with it next week. And I invite you to take this meditation with you like lifelong and practice this type of meditation as often as you can. It can be your own version of it. But the concept of the hara space is that it's a reservoir. So we'll go there and we'll create what we call our inner reservoir, as it's the space where we can always go to be replenished. It is always resourced. It is our vital life force. It's literally just like water. It sustains all life. And we will go there and create the space that anytime we need to be replenished, or we're feeling thirsty, or we're feeling exhausted, if we go there, we can immediately feel the vital life force that we all have inside of us. So with that being said, we'll close our eyes and we'll take a second to ground in. We're just gonna do some quick breath work to kind of land into the space together and kind of get out of the head and the headiness of the lecture and drop down now into the hara space so that we can authentically meet our parts from self-energy. So we'll do a boxed breath breathing. So we'll just breathe in for 5, hold for 5, and exhale for 5. So we'll start. So breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold for 2, 3, 4, 5. And exhale for 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale for 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll do 2 more. Inhale 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 2, 3, 4, 5. Last one. Inhale all the way into the low belly space. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhale. Let it all go. 2, 3, 4, 5. So just sit here for a moment, feeling in the body what it feels like to bring breath and spaciousness into the body. And just notice what the body's feeling. I invite you to notice if there are any parts of the body that are speaking, that have a little twitch or a little ailment or a little pain or a little tickle. And maybe footnote that for later. But just having awareness of what's moving inside the physical and energetic body as we begin to quiet the mind. So we're going to do a visualization to bring us down to the reservoir space. So I want you to imagine up above your head in the crown area this beautiful lotus flower with its petals wide open and ready to receive. Just hovering there above the head. And now I want you to imagine a bright white light coming down from the expanse of the universe and the cosmos surrounding us, and channeling this white light directly into the center of this lotus flower. As we begin descension now down into the hara space. And keep breathing. We're going to bring that white light down now through the third eye center in between the eyes, the seat of our intuition. Just going to pass that white light through there and any parts that may live there. And continue bringing that white light down through the central body. We're going to bring it down through the center line of the body. And we'll bring that light down now through the throat as we leave the headspace. And we'll just take a few seconds for any parts who have fear of where we're going. And just let them know we'll be back soon. That we promise we'll return. And that they're okay for a few moments while we descend. So breathe some breaths into the headspace and just notice if anyone is showing up. Or there's any discomforts in the physical body or dissociation or parts of us trying to bring us elsewhere. And if you just notice that there's a part maybe trying to bring you elsewhere, if you could just ask it if you can come back in a few minutes. If it would be okay with that. And just see if it'll give permission to keep going down. And so if you have the permission, we'll keep going down, bringing that light through the throat now. That healing energy of the divine universe coming down now through our voice and our internal voice power. Replenishing that space and the parts that live there. As we drop further now, down into the heart space. Bring that white light there and ask any parts of you who are living in the heart space that have attachment to where you're going, if they would also just step back for a moment. Let them know you'll be right back. But give them that life force. Let them know you're resourced. As you continue to move further now down into the solar plexus, just above the belly button. And any parts that might live there, asking them if you could just step aside and bring that light down further. As we land now in the hara space of the low belly. Right around where the sacral chakra exists, which is our creativity and our confidence, right? The 8 C words that thrive in this area. The part of us that's curious. And so when we arrive down to the low belly, let's just all take a breath into that space and breathe some spaciousness into the low belly. And so I want you to use your imagination and envision your internal reservoir. What does that look like for you? What water source resonates with your being that brings replenishment. It can be an oasis in the desert, a pool in the jungle, an expansive ocean. Whatever your reservoir looks like, begin to kind of curate now a visual around a body of water that exists
So I want you to take all of that love you just experienced and harnessed. And from that space, I want you to invite into the body and ask if there are any parts that would like to show up today, that either live in the hips, you can be opened up to this hip opener, or live in the kidney line, that have deep fears or paranoias, or that live in the liver line, and that have anger or frustrations, that live in the spleen line, that have self-worth or abandonment. And just see if any parts show up today in this position. And if they have a lot to say, that you can just listen from the self-energy you just cultivated. And just hear them, maybe even for the first time. If you have a part that's saying it can't hear anything or doesn't know what I'm talking about, it's also a part. So you can bring your attention there to that one first. Or if there's any resistance in the body or discomfort, you can go there and see who's living there. So we'll continue moving through yin positions that work the kidney meridian. Like I said, it's kind of the powerhouse meridian line of the entire energetic body. And it's really the hydration elixir that lubricates the yin tissues and flushes out the entire kidney meridian. Our kidneys govern the health of our bone marrow, our cellular regeneration, the immunity of our cells, and as it's associated with the winter season and the water element, we'll keep working with the kidney to go into the deepest and darkest and slowest places of the energetic body. And really use the water element in favor of healing. We'll stay in this position for about 1 more minute, so you can let your planner cards know that they're almost done. But a big part of yin postures is that we're actually not working with musculature, we're working with joints and fascia and ligaments non-static poses is what really can unlock what's stuck and stagnant in the energetic body. And that requires no yang asana or movement, but actually just staying in one position, even through the discomfort. So let's take one more really deep cleansing breath here. You guys can slowly make your way back up. Very slowly bring the head back up so that we can let the blood flow, let this immersion come back into the body slowly. We're going to move into Pranayasana, so the butterfly pose. So you can come to a seat. If you'd like to be propped, you can put your bolster on your lap. So, or in front. You can bring a block up to elevate the bolster. We can move ahead if you have flexibility, your hips are tight. And we'll take a deep breath, inhale, and you can put 2 blocks if you need. You're also welcome to put a blanket, and if your neighbor's not using theirs, you can put both blankets underneath the hip space to support the hips as they're opening if your hips are tight. And we'll just inhale deep and exhale, fold the body down. And so again, we're working with the kidney meridian here, so are you ready to work with the same heart that I've shown up in the last one? And it's just a time for inquiry. Who's showing up? Can we relax the parts of us that are feeling discomfort and ease into the posture? We bring space and breath into the parts that feel tight or constrained. relax the head and release the neck, where we tend to grip a lot in the vagus nerve area, which is just below the occiput, just below where the head meets the spine. We have the powerhouse of our central nervous system resides in the area. And can we release what that part is perpetually often holding? And if you feel a gripping in that area, can you go there and just get curious about who is living there? And as this really opens up the kidney line that starts in the big toe, runs up through the heel and all the way up the inner legs, through the center body. Where it enters the lungs and joins the heart. And terminates at the root of the tongue. Again, this is the fear channel, so if there is anyone showing up today who has deep fears, transitions, scarcities, just get curious. Invite them into your internal family world. And we here for about 30 more seconds. Take one more deep inhale to clear out the kidney line. And exhale, release. And you can slowly come out of the position, make your way back up. And just take a second to notice what the body's feeling. Physical or energetic level. If any parts have shown up, just take note of them. And move into our final position. Should be toes nose. We'll use this to reawaken and reinvigorate the body. So we'll come onto our knees. Ready? We'll just sit back on toes like this. You really want to rest. Rest your butt on your heels as much as is comfortable, and if you need to bolster or blanket in between to elevate the hips so it's not so much pressure on the toes. Definitely do that for yourself. And we'll leave here for a short period of time, but this again is a really, really good one for that kidney meridian line. And opening up the feet, the center of the feet are said to be where our prana body is like really held. Because it brings everything up from the ground and into the energy body. So this is a really good pose to do daily and open up the fascia that is in the tendons that live right and the plantar that lives right in that part of the foot. So just breathe here. We'll only be here for about 1 minute. And again, if you want to make yourself more comfortable in this position, just bring a blanket under your hips. And just close your eyes and breathe into the posture. Bring some gratitude into the feet that hold us all day, that have walked many miles throughout this lifetime and always get us from A to B. And just notice if you're gripping and see if you can just move for a second. Release. And bring breath and space there. And again, any parts of us who might be showing up in this space, our feet hold a lot. So there's a good chance there might be someone living down and around that area. A few more breaths here. One more deep, clearing breath for that kidney line. Yeah. And we'll just counterimpose this real quick. So tap out your feet when you're ready. And then come up and on to the ankles. The ankles, and we'll just stretch the body out that way. And just counterpose, stretch the feet for a minute and breath. And then you can come to your seat when you're ready. And so before we move into anything else, I just want everyone to take a minute to just write and integrate anything that came up for them. There's a blank page on the very back that I left blank for this reading. Or if you have your journal, of course, you can write in there. And just we'll take about 3 minutes to notice, just write anything we notice, any parts that may have shown up, anything may be called to us, any discomforts we noticed in the body and where they were located so that we can come back to them later. Yeah, just taking a few moments to integrate the work that you just did. So it's 5 after 6 if anybody does have any obligations they need to get to. Otherwise, we'll be about 10-15 more minutes to kind of close the 2-hour session since we started around 4:20. And we'll just do a closing practice of going around in a little sharing circle of just what came up, what we noticed, maybe first that we met, just anything that you want to share and bring into the space or the circle. This is an opportunity for our hearts to be witnessed, which is a really, really healing opportunity for them, as often many of them feel, especially our deepest exiles, they feel very unseen and unheard, and that's why they were created in the first place. So part of the healing opportunity we can offer them is to let them be witnessed in a safe space where they're not going to be judged, where they can really authentically be heard, and where we can meet them right where they're at. So, we can just kind of circle to would you like to start?
Yeah, definitely dropping in deeper into that hara space too. Of just not trusting, the love and support, disbelief or unworthiness first to kind of react or tense to almost feeling like there's not enough there. Thank you as guided on just feel into it, let it be.
Do you feel you were able to get there at some point, or the protectors were just like a little too loud in this moment?
They were, and then I think that, yeah, as you said, just opening up your cells, opening up your body, trusting energy is just there, that divine, universal love and life force but a few things, and then through the yin and like muscles of it, they try to grip your foundation in life and build and stay strong, hold together, just like screaming, just too much control, gripping in fear, the life of the uncertainty.
Yeah, it's a practice. I think many of us know well that coming to the mat is always the hardest part of this work. Thank you for sharing.
I think maybe it's part, the challenges is like, is feeling, just feeling in general. And so I have like this technique where I just go to it, and in this case it's just lower back pain, it's okay. And then maybe there's like a self-worth thing there eventually, but it wasn't this slight. But what I kept doing is I was like, okay, is there a color there? And then there was like this deep red, and then I just said to it, I was like, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Just repeatedly. And I found there was like a loosening. And at first what happened, like my whatever part kept going back to me like, my back hurts, my back hurts. And then it got really silly at some point. It's like, my back hurts. And then I just saw how silly it was, it's like, and so I'm like, yeah, and then kind of loosened.
I love that actually. So when our parts surface, it's like they're not always a visual representation of human. And we very often want to like humanize and like anthropomorphize like these parts of us as, because they are entities, and sometimes they will show up in like a very human form that we can resonate and relate with. And sometimes they will show up just as colors or sensations or smells or orbs or little foreign animalistic
realistic looking things we've never seen before. And so that's also something to be open to, is as they begin to show themselves, if we're truly in self, we'll notice if judgment comes in. Because very often, like fear, a protector of fear will come in and be like, no, that's not what we're seeing, that's weird, I don't know what that is. And just being open to the fact that if something is showing itself, it's trying to be seen exactly as it would like to be seen. And if that's like, it's showing itself right now as like a simple color of red, that's its way of showing you like, I'm here, but I'm not fully, maybe it's not fully ready to be seen, or maybe that is just the way it wants to be seen. And so that is really helpful, because now you have kind of like a way to go in and meet that part deeper, because you know what it's kind of shown itself a little bit to you. So yeah, it's something to stay curious about. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, so in the initial hara meditation, because I've done that meditation with you before, I know what my reservoir looks like. I'm able to access it. But when you had us give those, bring love into certain moments, I had like a really significant somatic reaction whereby I like kind of got shaken out of the meditation. When those 2 points of love were brought in that meditation. I didn't attach any meaning to that, but then when we went into kind of our yin postures and started like sensing our parts a little bit more, the busy part was what I wanted to work with today, and she was ready to step right into it. And she kind of reminded me that hara space is my own internal love, which is infinite, which I don't need to keep a busy schedule or look towards the external for that type of validation or that like love, which is within me. So it was interesting to see, I guess, how they kind of talked with one another. That meditation and that part that like, you know, she's like, you're shaking because you know that it's within you, you don't need anything else. That's what came up for me.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I think there's a part that lives in my tear ducts that like I tend to like go to tears a lot in every situation. When I'm like, I'll like experience like anger and then I'll just like cry a lot right after, or like when I'm like in empathy and like listening to other people's stories or something, I don't know, I'm like in like a sensitive part comes up, and I just wonder if it's like attached to I don't know, like being a victim in some way or something. I don't know. I don't really know. But yeah, a lot came up that I wanna like, you know, be curious about, but also I love that meditation and calling in on people that we love and that love us. And I think like for a moment I was like grieving how much time I spend in my inner critic after like realizing like how much abundant love I have in my life. Like, so why spend so much time in that place of like denying myself that, you know? Yeah, and I think fear of abandonment part came up. A lot of things, I don't know, just like a lot was going on because my reservoir was actually like a running river this time. So maybe that's why so much was happening so fast, I don't know, but yeah. And then the fear of abandonment part, how it relates to different things that I struggle with, you know, on a daily basis around like body image stuff. Yeah, so all that stuff. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and I think we're so quick to be like, I don't know what that was. I think it felt like this, and it's like if you think it felt like something, it is telling you what it's feeling. And we often have a part that second guesses that feeling, and an emotion. It's like, yeah, no, we're not really clear on that. We're not really sure what that was. And it's like, it's telling you exactly what it feels. So just trust that the parts of you that were showing up are like, I think I was feeling this. It's telling you exactly what it feels, and to really just go there and just like go in a little deeper and let it feel in spaces where you can. But yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm curious.
I don't know, I feel like lately my body's definitely been stuck in more of like a freeze mode. I'm not necessarily more like fight or flight, definitely the freeze. And I felt that while doing like the postures, the poses and the stretches, and it started to open up. But I felt like as my hips were opening up, like more and more parts were coming to the front. And I thought it was interesting that like as I let my body open up physically, emotionally, I can open up to other parts of myself and get to know them. I definitely feel the fear of abandonment moment coming up as well. I've been kind of like not necessarily not paying attention, but kind of ignoring all of the parts that I need to focus on the most. So it's been nice to be here and have a safe space to open up and start to discover that and face down a little more.
Yeah, it's a whole new realm for me, so it's a lot of unknown. My right toe and my ankle are very tight. I don't know if there's some sort of release that needs to happen, but I don't understand how. And I'm sure it's more than just a physical sense.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you. Yeah, and it's something, I mean, our physical body is constantly communicating to us because that's where the parts live. They live in the physical body, and if they're communicating through the mind and we're constantly like shoving that away or distrusting what they're saying or dissociating from what they're saying, they begin to get louder through the physical body and create ailments or disorders or diseases or things in order to get our attention. And so it's quite wild. Like my personal experience is like I grew up with this disorder, narcolepsy, that I was always labeled was genetic, and it was something I was born with and something that was just going to affect my life forever. And she's absolutely a part when I went and met her. And she's my 16-year-old part. And she tells me exactly why she does what she does. She's my nervous system regulator, she decided to call herself. And it's just really interesting the way that she was able to like manipulate my physiology, like my literal, the chemistry in my brain in order to get her needs met. And so, but I've gone and met her fully and we know each other very well. But yeah, so it's really kind of wild the way that they can communicate through the physical body and manipulate the physical body to get their needs met when they're screaming at us. So if anyone had anything come up in that physical realm, that is definitely something to go to and pay attention to, because it will continue to get louder if you don't listen.
Yeah, and along those lines, I am exhausted, and that was one thing that my body was telling me that was really, really hard to silence. And it wasn't until you stretched the feet that I think I actually realized where a huge part of me lives is in my feet, which is a huge breakthrough because I've always been wondering, like, I feel like I have a part like in my back, like I have all these ideas of what it might be, like inklings that like this is real, and it's part of me that feels very deeply the need to prove herself without any like support of any type. Like there's a deep, I think like self-wound there. Perhaps that's the example, but like, yeah, my feet take a lot of abuse. It was like I was feeling everything, like the frostnip that I gave myself, the ski boots, like the hundreds of miles that I've hiked. It all like comes out, and yeah, like it makes me cry because it's like, yeah, we put her through so much. Put myself through so much. My feet carried it. So that was pretty hard for me.
Yeah, our protectors are like on high. They're exhausted. And when we like start to go in there and see how much work they're doing, of course it brings us to tears. Like we feel sad for them. Like like you don't need to do all that. Why are you doing all that? And they're like, we got it. You know, and it's like it's sad. There's a lot of sadness associated to the inner workings of our parts who are doing all these things, whether it's the exile who really holds and hosts the sadness, or the deep compassion we have from self energy for the protectors and the way that they're protecting us, because we are deeply grateful and we see them for everything they're doing, and we're sad for them. We're sad that they're gripping. We want them to just be free, right? And we're allowed to be sad for that. So like, this is a space to cry and have tears and open up and be vulnerable. That is exactly what this container is for. And those tears are absolutely welcome. And our parts, if we have a protector that steps in and is like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, that's a part. And that's the ending. We can't go to that part that really wants to cry if we have a protector that's like, no, don't cry, no one else is crying. Like, it's like, work with that part first, and like, no, it's cool. Like, this is exactly why we're here. And once that part can release, and you can have the cry is the somatic release in the energetic body. The energetic body has like 3 layers, and the most important one that we can really get to actually heal and move the energy through the system is the crying and release. So just know, everybody, that that is exactly what this container has specifically been offered and created for, is that somatic release that you can release in any way that you need to express.
My unlovable and abandoned part showed up in the reservoir. My late partner showed up, and it's been really hard for me to connect to his love recently. And so, like, receiving that was really beautiful. But I think, like, the part that felt really solid to me was when I turned around and I saw my embodied self, you know, that like, he's there and I can feel his love and connect to that, but also feel my own love, you know, and that's always there. So that was just a beautiful experience, and just start to like allow myself to be loved by me. So yeah, it's really wonderful.
So I was focusing on the avoidance that I've been doing in my life. And I carry shame around that, so it's even difficult for me to talk about it in this moment. But I essentially tried to like meet that and answer it. How can I, from the self part, like clear the room to like have the strength and the confidence to not be avoidant about what I want. So essentially what I reflected on that was that structural order and organization in like my physical life and like the way I perceive information visually is just gonna help focus and organize my mind. And like maybe it's, well, I don't think it's funny, but it could be funny that it is like this symbol, like I have a to-do list of like, I literally need to go buy a large daily physical paper planner. Because like, although I've tried to use like iPhone calendar or all these different ways of keeping my goals or my tasks in line, like I need my visual to like add up in my head.
Overwhelmed. I'm trying to like run away right now and for like my body needs to go pee. It doesn't, and I'm cold, but I'm sweating. I'm dripping sweat. Because I don't know what part of me knows that I have to like get up and go get a jacket because I'm cold. But past family member that has been with me, but has been with me, and just his all knowing has allowed me to also step into that. He's like, let's go. So I was actually able to talk to myself as like a little baby, and I think that's why I get so blocked with my voice a lot, is because she didn't know how to talk yet, and she wasn't allowed to. So yeah, I'm really grateful. It's super heavy though, and my whole body, is also vibrating. I have a lot of this part in like a freeze mode almost, I guess, sense of it. So I'm grateful that I was able to give myself a little patience and actually get there, because it will improve the way that I genuinely live my life through fear.
I had a lot of pain elements coming up. So much so that, like, actually, I thought, you've got your eyes open watching me? Because I had to get out of the pose. My leg was cramping up, my toe was in pain. I'm like, hang on a minute, where did that toe pain come from? You know, and I think I just smashed my body just to, deal with things. And I think it relates to being a kid and being told not to, don't complain, nothing's wrong, go on, keep going, just, I think that's part of it. And then it all related to the reservoir, when you said, invite those that love you, I'm like, oh my God, what's coming? And there were a lot of people that weren't even afterwards, when I was writing down, there weren't people there that should have been there. That was interesting for me. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that person, which was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not sad, not, I was just, wow, okay, yeah. Sort of an eye-opener.
And sometimes it just requires more time. We did like a quick movie through, and you can only think of so many people in a short amount of time, so maybe think of the movie a little after. To let you know they're holding space wherever they are in your life. So much. The second part of the series will be primarily integration based. So we did kind of the lecture part, got the basis and foundations out of why we're here and what we're doing. And so next week we'll be more taking the parts that we met, who will certainly have a lot to say this week, and really dive in with them next week in a way where they can really be held to release what they'll probably be gripping all week. And that's kind of deep design, is that we can meet them softly and create space throughout the week and re-invite them back in next week to create trust and relationship. To see how they show up throughout the week as we begin to notice them a little more. And they've created a little more awareness in the body of their existence. And that we can let them know throughout the week as they're showing up that there will be a space coming up for them where they can release. Because they will be probably gripping really tight on wanting your attention now that they've gotten a little taste of what it feels like to have access to self. They're gonna be like, I need you. I need you the way I needed somebody when I was created, which is often a caregiver role, which is what our internal caregiver of self is. And so just notice as they show up and as they grip, and you can mindfully from self energy let them know that on Sunday there's a place for them to come, and that you promise they can be heard. And that will be really healing in itself for them. And also, it begins to create trust and lets them know where they're going, because they want that control. They don't want to be in the unknown, and they don't want the abandonment. They want to know there's a place for them to come back to while you're building your connection to self-energy in a way where that can resource them. Because that takes time. It's not like an overnight 2-week process of like, oh, now we just all have access to self and we'll just be there all the time. It's a lifelong practice. And so as we begin to create that movement and momentum in our own inner journey, letting those parts that are showing up and asking for our attention know that it's a journey and that you see them and you'll meet them there when the time is right. And that's like really important for them to hear, because they want to be heard, not ignored. So just that's something to take with you through the week. And I deeply invite you to find your way back here next week if that is in alignment for you. If it's not, again, like this is a practice you can take with you and do on your own. There are plenty of resources on the internet, guided meditations, journal prompts, books written by the author, podcasts, things you can like really dive into. And actually in the back of this, I put a list of further readings that are deeply intertwined with this work that can really help you kind of digest it a little more and explore it a little more. But yeah, if at the very least you can drop yourself into a journal session within the next week for your parts, that is going to be really healing for them. If you can't make it back here, trying to find your own integration practices to work with them. If you do yoga, invite them to your yoga practice. If you run, whatever you do to bring yourself to self-energy, if you can find a way to integrate the parts that show up into those daily practices and let them know they're seen, that will really begin to create a tether to self. So yeah, we'll just do a closing breath to kind of close out the space and ground ourselves back down. And this space is open if you do need some more time to integrate. And if you have any questions or concerns, I'm your resource. Please reach out to me throughout the week if anything comes up that you need guidance in or comfort in, or just somebody to be in here for you. Please know that that is absolutely accessible at any time. So let's close your eyes. Now let's just take a really deep breath into that low belly space. Inhale through the nose, fill up the low belly. And big open mouth lion's breath, exhale. Let's do that 2 more times. Inhale. Fill it up. Exhale. One more time, as deep as you can. And sigh it out as loud and dramatic as you can. Yeah, release that. And so while we're in this, just take a second on your inner being from self-energy, if you can access that still. And just send gratitude for the parts who showed up here today. Let them know you're grateful, that there's trust there for them to come and be seen. and you're grateful for the work they do in your system. And that as this journey unfolds, you will find the right time to heal them. Do one more.